Nearly 700,000 Israeli settlers live illegally across the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Almost 15% of these people are American, and the vast majority of them are religious fundamentalists and fanatics who believe that the Palestinian people, even if they have lived in this land for generations and have proof of it, have no right to inhabit it, and therefore it is the right of these settlers to go into their land and ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. I mean, if you ever watch a documentary like the one by Louis Theroux about ultra-Zionists, you will see it in the way that they speak. Or you could look to the recent speeches of figures like Daniela Weiss, the female leader of the settler movement. Or take their Jerusalem Flag Day, where Israeli settlers march through the old city of Jerusalem, attacking Palestinians, smashing up Palestinian-owned businesses, and chanting their favourite slogan, "Death to Arabs." And although you may not have heard about it because the ceasefire has given mainstream media in the West yet another excuse to stop talking about Palestine, for 2 of the last 3 nights this week, Israeli settlers have rampaged through multiple Palestinian towns, enacting pogroms, burning down Palestinian agricultural land, houses, cars, and attacking and killing Palestinian people. In fact, one of these pogroms got so out of hand that Israeli police officers had to shoot 2 Israeli settlers, which led to riots in Jerusalem. And these attacks were even condemned by Israel's Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, who said that the law must be enforced even against these settlers. But of course, this is not true, and the man is simply trying to distance himself from the most violent acts of Israel's settler colonial project. And this is where the title of my video comes from, because if you're familiar with my content, it may confuse you. And don't worry, I'm not trying to imply that the settlers are some kind of myth, because everything that they do is illegal. I mean, the ICJ recognised this in 2024, so even if Donald Trump continues with his policy from his first term of claiming that these settlements are illegal, under international law there is no legality about them. Even governments who barely support Palestine, like the United Kingdom, do at least still maintain that they don't like the settlements and that they're unacceptable. But this is where the myth I want to talk about comes in. It is the way in which people who support Israel act as if the settlers are some kind of aberration, that they have nothing to do with the Zionist project, that they're just some unfortunate right-wing excess of Zionism. This is not the reality, and it's a classical trick of settler colonialism. The truth about Israeli settlers in the West Bank is that they are key to Israel's settler colonial expansion and the Zionist project. Now, if you've ever dealt with a liberal Zionist, you will know that they recoil from the right-wing extremes of Netanyahu's government, and before they go on to justify Israel's horrifying crimes in Gaza, they let you know how much they disagree with Benjamin Netanyahu, his right-wing government, and the settlements in the West Bank. They claim that these excesses have nothing to do with the Zionist project. But as the key scholar in the field of settler colonial studies, Patrick Wolfe, once wrote, this is standard behaviour of settler colonies. In Wolfe's profound article from 2006, Settler Colonialism and the Elimination of the Native, he would write, rather than something separate from or running counter to the colonial state, the murderous activities of the frontier rabble constitute its principal means of expansion. These have occurred behind the screen of the frontier, in the wake of which, once the dust has settled, the irregular acts that took place have been regularised, and the boundaries of white settlement extended. Characteristically, officials express regret at the lawlessness of this protest, while resigning themselves to its inevitability. And Patrick Wolfe's words are as accurate today as they were when he first wrote them. Israeli settlers since October the 7th, 2023, and until March of 2024, built 18 new roads in the West Bank that, whilst unauthorised by the Israeli government, they did nothing about them. And this is the standard practice of every single Israeli government. The only time where settlements were ever dismantled was in the Gaza Strip by Ariel Sharon. But the truth is that these settlements weren't dismantled out of the goodness of Sharon's heart. There just weren't that many Israeli settlers living in the Gaza Strip, and they kept on coming under attack by Hamas along with the soldiers protecting them, so there was really no reason to keep these settlements alive in Gaza. And by pulling out and reconstituting their forces around the Gaza Strip, Israel could continue its occupation whilst exposing its soldiers and settlers to a far smaller risk. On some previous occasions, small numbers of settlements built illegally in the West Bank without government permits have been dismantled. However, these are rare cases. Normally, Israeli governments don't care, and the so-called opposition as well is just as complicit. Take the last time Netanyahu wasn't in power in 2021 and 2022. The Yair Lapid and Lapid Bennet government actually increased the number of settlements being built, and even Benny Gantz, who represents the key opposition figure in Israel right now, has referred to settlements as sacred. Therefore, whilst his policies towards settlement may not be as aggressive as Netanyahu and his current cabinet, it is unlikely that things are going to change in Israel. Settlements did indeed become a bigger issue after the 1977 election of the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who was the first Likud Prime Minister of Israel and consistently referred to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria in order to enshrine Israel's biblical right to the land. However, the fact is that even under Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's allegedly peace-loving Prime Minister who signed the Oslo Accords with the Palestinians, a key moment in peace which produced this famous handshake, allowed settlement to go on during the Oslo Accords, and they even got bigger during this time. So when people try and draw this distinction between their support for Israel and how they're a Zionist, but at the same time try and reject what the settlers are doing, this simply does not work. The settlers are key to Israeli state expansion and have been for decades. So even these people who claim to be liberal Zionists and don't support the worst excesses of Israel, ultimately, this is what the Zionist project looks like. They believe that they have a biblical right to all of historic Palestine, and every single Israeli government does nothing about these settlers, so they are complicit in what they are doing. And as I began this video, these settlers are dangerous religious fanatics. This has been the case really since the 1970s, when the godfather of the Israeli far right, Meir Kahane, began to preach his ideology of attacking Palestinians in a campaign which he called Terror Against Terror, where he encouraged people to engage in something called price tag attacks, which were basically going into Palestinian villages, burning down their homes, attacking them, and generally just harassing Palestinians in response to suicide attacks or other actions by militants in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The only really significant change that has happened in recent years is the power that the ideology of Kahane has gained within Israel, and every time I mention this guy, I feel like it is worth noting how extreme he actually was. He tried to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque himself and received administrative detention, which was one of the first times that it was used against a Jewish person in the land of Israel. This guy said that all Palestinians would be expelled or he would slit their throats. His response to the Palestinian uprising, the First Intifada, which was predominantly non-violent resistance like economic boycotts and strikes, was to say that all journalists should be expelled from the area, every camera should be shut off, and the Israeli military should enter there and do what they needed for 3 days. And now, an adherent to this guy's ideology, who is a settler himself in the West Bank, Itamar Ben-Gvir controls Israel's police and their prison system. This guy is a religious fanatic with an ideology that is ultimately no different to ISIS. He believes in Jewish supremacy and their right to do whatever they want to Palestinians. He doesn't care about taking their land, he doesn't care about expelling them, and he most certainly doesn't care about destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the most beautiful buildings in all of historic Palestine and one of the 3 most holy sites in Islam with incredible importance to Palestinian Muslims. He had a photo of this being toppled in his house, and when the reporter said to him, "Itamar, there's something in the way," he said, "We will change this." Similarly, Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister, a man who said that he didn't want his wife giving birth next to Arabs because they were his enemies, now controls the finances of Israel. He is consistently able to deny taxes going to the Palestinian Authority, the government in the West Bank, so they can't pay the salaries of people there, and unemployment increases. And simultaneously, he's authorizing more and more illegal settlements in Palestinian land and giving them huge amounts of funding. So really, the only thing that has changed in Israel is that now you have ideologically committed settlers in their government who are able to offer funding, military and political support to religious fanatics in the West Bank. And the outcomes for Palestinians have been horrendous. Whilst in the West we have to hear every week about hate marches because people are protesting for Palestine and alleged anti-Semitism on the streets, in the West Bank there are regular pogroms where masked Israelis are going into Palestinian villages, beating them, throwing stones at them, harassing them, stealing livestock, stealing land, killing them, and generally just targeting Palestinians because they are not Jewish people. And yet there is almost total silence on this. The Western governments may occasionally condemn it and put in a couple of sanctions, but they never go hard enough. They never sanction Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. They might not want to meet them, but they don't do anything about it. And this is where the trick that Wolf was talking about lies. These people pretend, oh, it's just some extremist settlers, they're different to the Israeli society, but Israel is a society that was always premised on settlement. And in 2018, Israel changed its basic law and stated that the promotion of Jewish settlement is a national value, a distinctly apartheid-esque law, because it means that Palestinians, even if they're citizens of Israel, have to accept that increasing land theft of Palestinians is just something that is their national value. You can literally find an article from CNN which states in 2023 the Israeli military referred to what the settlers were doing in the West Bank as a pogrom, but they didn't do anything about it. Their military stand around the settlers, protecting them from the local Palestinians who are protesting and don't want their land to be stolen. It is so infuriating watching these horrifying things unfold against Palestinians, and nothing more than some lukewarm condemnations from Western governments, when the reality is that this is Israeli society. This is what Zionism looks like. This is what happens when you have an ideology which says that you have a biblical right to build a nation state in the land of another people. And I mean, it's not some big secret that this was always going to end up horribly. The King Crane Commission in 1919 said that there would be no way to establish a Jewish state in Palestine without force, and that also force would be needed to maintain it. And what I'm trying to make clear here is that this is what Israel is like. These settlers aren't some aberration, but rather they're the standard practice of Israel. The Israeli government votes over and over again that they don't want a two-state solution. Their Prime Minister Netanyahu makes this clear. Even again, Yitzhak Rabin, the guy who signed the Oslo Accords, the key step towards the two-state solution, literally said he didn't want Palestinians to have a state. And these settlers are on the ground in the West Bank, altering the reality, destroying Palestinian communities by building more and more outposts which annex land and separate Palestinian communities from each other with roads that Palestinians are not allowed to use. I mean, just look at this map of the West Bank. It is filled with these mini colonies, filled with extremist Israeli settlers who harass Palestinians until they move out of their own homeland. And increasingly, Palestinians in the West Bank are now reporting that Israeli settlers are wearing Israeli military uniform, that they are giving the commands to the IOF if they enter the area. They are in control of what is happening, because as Wolf tells us, these people are not separate from the Israeli government. They are paramount to creating Israel, and they always will be. So don't allow governments to trick you into thinking that Israel has any interest in the two-state solution. What they are interested in is expanding and taking more Palestinian land. So if any liberal Zionists have stumbled on this video, I hope it's an indication to you that this is standard practice of settler colonies, pretending that the extremist settlers are an aberration who have nothing to do with the beautiful project that the government wishes to enact. The reality is that these settlers are important to Israel. They are the ones changing reality.